Questions without notice, and I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. It's only been a year under an Albanese government and Middle Australia is hurting, with the typical Australian family at least $25,000 worse off as the cost of living worsens. This is despite personal promises from the Prime Minister before the election of cheaper power, cheaper mortgages and that families would be better off. Why do Australians always pay more when Labor breaks its promises?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, it was a year yesterday that we were elected to office with an agenda for a better future. And what we've been doing is implementing that agenda.
Order.
As a direct result of what this government has done, 1 million families, 1.2 million to be precise, will pay less for childcare from January 1. As a result of what we put in the budget, tripling the bulk billing incentive, 11 million Australians will pay less to see a doctor. As a result of what we have done already, in the first 4 months of this year, Australians paid $76 million less for their prescriptions because of our cheaper medicines plan. Because of our budget, 6 million Australians will pay less for their medicines in the future. 480,000 Australians will go through their TAFE courses for free as a result of our policies, and 180,000 are already doing just that. 5 million Australians, as a result of the legislation that they opposed to provide $3 billion.
Will cease interjecting.
$3 billion together with states and territories.
The Leader of the Opposition.
$3 billion they voted against to provide relief from power prices. As a direct result of that, 1 million small businesses will benefit from that. Again, a measure that those opposite voted against. 3.7 million small businesses will be able to access an expanded instant asset write-off. 3.7 million small businesses will be eligible for a tax incentive if they upgrade to more energy-efficient equipment and facilities. And as a result of what we have done with our measures, and the day after the Leader of the Opposition's budget reply, I was there in the electorate of Cook, there in Miranda, with Mike Baird and with the Minister for Aged Care to commemorate and to say thank you to the aged care workers who have looked after our oldest Australians during the pandemic and still do today. They deserve more than just our thanks. They deserved a pay rise, and we provided $11.3 billion in our budget to make sure that 250,000 of them would get just that.
I give the call to the honourable member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is Australia's work with the Quad helping to advance our national interest, and what were some of the outcomes of the Quad leaders' meeting held over the weekend?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Corangamite for her question and for her understanding that in today's globalised world we need to engage with our friends and partners in order to deliver for our national interest. And the Quad Leaders Summit that was held in Hiroshima on Saturday evening that I convened was the third in-person meeting of what is a diplomatic partnership of 4 great democracies determined to shape a better future for our shared region. For the first time, we issued a vision statement setting out our shared vision for the region and the future of the Quad, reiterating our shared commitment to an open, stable, secure and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Our 4 nations will continue work with ASEAN, with the Pacific Island Forum and the Indian Ocean Rim Association. Our joint statement set out the positive work we're doing together in the region, clear and practical outcomes from this summit, a clean energy supply chains diversification program, a Quad healthy security partnership building on the many vaccines that we provided for the region through the Quad, a Quad partnership for cable connectivity and resilience, a Quad infrastructure fellowships program that will really assist particularly our Pacific Island neighbours, and an open radio access network deployment that will mean that they can access support for communications in a much more effective way. It is always in Australia's interest, national interest, to engage in these meetings, and I thank President Biden, Prime Minister Kishida and Prime Minister Modi for the cooperative way in which they engaged and continue to engage on a day-to-day basis. Australia is determined to invest in our capabilities, but also to invest in our relationships, to make Australia more stable and secure at home and more influential in the world. Because building and strengthening these ties, nation to nation and in regional groupings, is a key part of how my government is building a stronger foundation for that better future.
Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. 1 year ago, the Prime Minister promised a $275 cut to electricity bills, but power prices have increased. 1 year ago, the Prime Minister promised cheaper mortgages, but since then, interest rates have risen 10 times. 1 year ago, the Prime Minister promised no new taxes, but he has already hit the resources sector with a gas tax, the agriculture sector with a farm tax, and Aussie truckies with a truck tax. Why do Australians always pay more when Labor breaks its promises?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Deputy Leader for her question. And the government of which she was a part, of course, knew all about introducing new taxes and new revenue measures. They introduced the changes to HECS thresholds and indexation, introduction of the temporary budget repair levy, reintroduction of fuel excise indexation, increased application charges for partner visas, increased depreciation life for computers, increased charges for visa applications, introduced a cap on salary sacrifice meals and entertainment, changes to managed investment trusts, changes to offshore banking unit regime, changes to FIFO workers, changes to tax rules for working holiday makers, changes to the calculation of work-related car expenses, changes to foreign investment fees for real estate and farming, removal of FTB Part A large family supplement, introduction of no jab, no pay for payments, cessation of double dipping for paid parental leave.
Order. The Prime Minister.
They increased passport
Order. The
fees,
Prime Minister.
tobacco taxes.
Prime Minister will pause.
They applied the GST on low
so
value
I can hear
goods.
from the
They
Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister will just pause for a moment, and the Prime Minister will pause for a moment. We'll just pause for a moment. Order. There is far too much noise. There is far too much noise in the House. I'd like to hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, the point of order is relevant. The Prime Minister's long list of previous measures by this government are not remotely relevant to the detailed question that he was asked.
The question was about the promise of commitments by the government and also why do Australians do worse. So I think the Prime Minister is doing a compare and contrast regarding that part of the question, but I'll ask him to return to the other part of the question for the remaining 2 minutes.
Indeed, Mr Speaker, you could drive a truck through that question. But what we had,
Order.
This is a mob that wanted
Members on my left,
on
the
every
Leader of
single
the
time that you
Nationals.
went to the doctor.
Order.
But I'm
Order.
asked by the Deputy
Members
Leader
on my
about our
left.
budget, and my attention was drawn towards a quite extraordinary comment by the Deputy Liberal Leader, and she said this about the RBA minutes. She said this: "It sounds to me as if they are sounding alarm bells on this budget." There's only one problem with that. The meeting was the week before the budget. Before the budget. So the RBA governor apparently is Nostradamus. Nostradamus. It says everything
The
about
Manager of Opposition
their
Business.
catastrophic nonsense, where they carry on everything is a catastrophe, everything's a disaster, everything's going to get wrong on their watch.
Order.
They have nothing
The member for
constructive
Deakin.
to add. Nothing
The
constructive
member for
to
Deakin
add.
will cease interjecting.
But the only person who was more pleased and chuckling
for
about
Fisher.
that comment by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition was the bloke who's sitting there.
Order. Give the call to the member for Swan.
My question is to the Prime Minister. What were the outcomes of the Prime Minister's recent meeting with President Biden, and how will they shape the alliance between Australia and the United States into the future?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. It was a pleasure to meet again with President Biden. Our most important relationship is our alliance with the United States, and indeed the United States, of course, I would have thought the heckling wasn't necessary. I would have thought there was bipartisan agreement on that issue. President Biden and I have signed a historic agreement to advance climate and clean energy action between our countries. We agree that climate change action is a national security issue, and he indeed stated on Saturday that this is a new pillar of our alliance, a new third pillar indeed. The Climate Critical Minerals and Clean Energy Transformation Compact is an ambitious agreement. It will expand and diversify our clean energy supply. It will promote the sustainable supply and processing of critical minerals and to support the development of clean hydrogen, battery technologies and other clean energy products. President Biden also undertook to work with Congress to enable Australia to be included as a domestic supplier under the US Defence Production Act. Now, that is critical because treating Australia as a domestic supplier will allow our industries to benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, that is worth 547 billion Australian dollars. That means big opportunities for Australia to build our renewable energy industry and create jobs, including in the hydrogen sector, to boost manufacturing, to support emerging industries. The only other country in the world with this designation is Canada. So we'll do this while ensuring our people and businesses can access secure, affordable, renewable energy. What this shows is that the Australia-US alliance continues to go from strength to strength. I look forward to visiting the United States later this year. Of course, President Biden, like other US leaders, will always be a welcome visitor here in Australia. But I thank him very much for the relationship that we have built over the last year. It is in Australia's national interest that we develop those strong personal relationships at a leadership level, and that is something that we have been doing. President Biden is a great friend of Australia, and I welcome the initiatives that arose on Saturday from our bilateral and then from the Quad meeting which we had later that day.
And on indulgence, I'll give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to join with the Prime Minister in emphasising the importance of the relationships and congratulate him for the engagement with the leaders over the course of the last 48 hours or so. We have an incredible friendship with each of the countries, with Japan, with the United States, with India, and the G7 nations otherwise obviously share many of our mutual interests and perspectives on the outlook in our region. So it is important that the world hears that there is a bipartisan support, as was demonstrated under the AUKUS agreement brokered by the coalition signed by the government. It's in our country's best interest to be strong, to provide deterrence, to provide reassurance to our friends in the region, and we continue the bipartisan approach in relation to this very important area of policy that's in the best interest of our country.
And on his birthday, I give the call to the member for Kennedy.
78 years young, Minister Speaker.
Order. The member for Kennedy has the call.
Minister of Indigenous Affairs, are you aware life expectancy for Homelander First Australians is just 56? ALP government in Queensland, 36,000 cattle gone, Torres Strait Island backyard fruit and vegetables, gone. Right to water dinghy fishing freehold title, gone. Didn't Dick Smith, back on Sunday, alert Australia to mass malnutrition following the market garden shutdowns? 8 First Australian MPs, Torres Strait's Von der Malone, Gulf Cedric Waldron, all ignored. Isn't Sarah Madison right? The only voice government listens to is its own.
Member's time has expired. Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I join with everyone in wishing you a very happy birthday, Member for Kennedy? And you are indeed 78 years young. I thank you for your question, but I want to recognise the very close relationship that the member for Kennedy has at places like Yarrabah, Doomadgee and Mornington Island, and I very much respect that relationship. And I am very conscious, as a member for Kennedy pointed out, of the huge gap in life expectancy, particularly in the communities that he represents. I thank the member for Kennedy for your question. I know that it is very heartfelt. Constitutional recognition through a voice to Parliament is all about making a difference on the ground in communities like those in North Queensland. It is about making sure the voices of Indigenous Australians in remote and regional communities are heard and not ignored. And I think that when you have a look at the Uluru dialogues and the way in which attention was particularly paid to Queensland, it is very obvious. In fact, recognition through a voice is about making sure communities like those in far North Queensland that I know the member for Kennedy cares about have a say in the policies that impact them and their communities. It is indeed about those practical outcomes that the member for Kennedy is very much concerned about. The stark reality is that Indigenous Australians in remote communities that the member for Kennedy represents experience a shocking and unacceptable gap in life expectancy, and something has to change. More of the same is not good enough. Later this year, all Australians will get a chance to do something about it, and I invite the member for Kennedy to be part of that journey by voting yes for recognition through a voice and giving people like the people in North Queensland a real say. Can I finish up by saying that Mayor Andrews and Yarrabah Council support the voice, and it is very strong. And on the issue of market gardens, I have spoken with the member about this previously. I look forward to having further conversations with the member for Kennedy about things like market gardens that make a real practical difference in the lives of First Nations people in North Queensland.
Give a call to the honourable member for Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How have outcomes improved for employment and wages after the first 12 months of the Albanese Labor government?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Caldwell for her question, and while I'm at it, on behalf of the member for Ford and I acknowledge Carol and Jeff Greenfield in the gallery today. Mr Speaker, Australians can be proud of what we've achieved together over the course of the last 12 months. Over the first year of the Albanese Labor government, we have seen the fastest jobs growth of any new government on record, faster than any of the major advanced economies, and the strongest wages growth in more than a decade. These have been defining features of a government dedicated to secure jobs and better pay for our people. These are deliberate design features of our economic policy, because when Australians are under cost of living pressure, decent wages are part of the solution, not part of the problem. And because more jobs and the beginnings of decent wages growth are among Australia's biggest advantages at a time of global uncertainty. The combination of weakness in the global economy combined with higher interest rates here and around the world will slow our economy in the months ahead, and we saw some of that in last week's unemployment numbers. But it's a remarkable collective achievement that unemployment has a 3 in front of it with everything that is coming at us from around the world. 330,000 jobs have been created in our first year, more than 4 times the number of jobs created in the first year of the Abbott government or the Howard government. Jobs growth here has been faster than in the US, Canada, Germany and the UK. Average full-time earnings are now around $1,000 a year higher than what they would have been under the sluggish wages growth that we saw under those opposite. Now, in order to get real wages growth, we need to see inflation moderate further and we need strong and sustainable wages growth as well. And that's why the budget was carefully calibrated to take some of the edge off cost of living pressures and the CPI next year without adding to inflation. This is why we supported minimum wage increases. It's why we funded and supported pay rises for aged care workers, changed the law to support secure jobs and better pay, made it easier for parents to work more and earn more if they want to, funded TAFE and uni places, invested in industries that will create secure, well-paid jobs. Now, those opposite, Mr Speaker, continue to say no to decent wages. Nothing would make them happier than another decade of wage stagnation. But on this side of the House, we take a different view. And when it comes to jobs growth and wages growth, we are delivering so that more hard-working Australians who go to work can provide for their loved ones.
The call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Middle Australia is hurting.
Order.
Middle Australia is hurting. The Treasurer had one job in the budget, to reduce pressure on inflation, not increase it, and the Treasurer failed. Why has the Treasurer brought down a big spending budget which makes life harder for Middle Australia?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Now I've heard everything, Mr Speaker. The party of deliberate wage stagnation and wage suppression has the nerve to come in here and talk about Middle Australia after everything they did so that Middle Australia copped it in the neck on their watch. They've got the nerve to come in here and ask about Middle Australia.
The Treasurer will resume his seat. The member for McEwen will cease interjecting. The Treasurer has been going for 20 seconds, but I'll hear from the member for Hume.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was about the budget. Middle Australia was in the talking points, not the budget.
You don't get to order. The Treasurer can pick out parts of the question as he sees fit to answer. I know. Order. The member for Hume has raised his point of order. I'm just going to ask the Treasurer to return to the question.
What would he know about relevance, Mr Speaker? I was asked about Middle Australia, and I'm talking about a budget which delivers for Middle Australia.
Order. The Treasurer will resume his seat. Order. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Treasurer is a serial offender, breaching standing orders about offensive words and reflections on members. He just sneeringly said, what would the Shadow Treasurer know about relevance? He ought to withdraw it.
I will hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, the point of order the Manager of Opposition Business has just taken is to claim that a word that they use about 27 times every question time is unparliamentary.
Yeah, we're happy with that.
That's what he's just said. In terms, I know they're angry over there, but in terms of a point of order, if the word relevance is now going to be unparliamentary, there's not many words left.
All right. We're 30 seconds into the answer. We've had 2 points of order. I'm just going to ask the Treasurer to return to the question so we can get through this answer. Given the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This was a budget for Middle Australia. Tripling the bulk billing incentive for families with kids under 16, reducing the costs of medicines, energy price relief, the Household Energy Upgrades Fund, getting more Australians into home ownership sooner, additional TAFE and training places, enhanced livability in our cities, more affordable early childhood education and care from the 1st of July, paid parental leave being extended, superannuation on payday. Mr Speaker, this was a budget for Middle Australia, and those opposite presided over a decade of deliberate wage stagnation and wage suppression, which should disqualify them from asking questions in this place about Middle Australia. Now, Mr Speaker, I was also asked to compare and contrast the experience of economic management and budget management under those opposite compared to the experience under us. And I appreciate, Mr Speaker, I'm grateful for the Shadow Treasurer almost every day, Mr Speaker, but especially today, because he gives me the opportunity to remind the Australian people through you of the absolute bin fire of economic irresponsibility which defined their decade in office. Now, Mr Speaker, the worst quarter for inflation was the March quarter last year when they were in office. And they handed down a budget which had $39 billion in net new spending in the budget. $39 billion when inflation was on the way up. After inflation starts moderating, our budget's got a net spend of $20 billion. So half as much spending with an extra $40 billion in savings compared to zero savings in the last budget of those opposite. And in the bizarre alternative universe that they inhabit, they want the Australian people to think that our budget, which puts downward pressure on inflation next year, versus their budget, which put upward pressure on inflation last year, they want to try and distract and hoodwink the Australian people. Now, the markets know better, and the economists know better. And what the markets and the economists have said since our budget was handed down is that our budget achieves the core objective, which is to take some of the edge off these cost-of-living pressures without adding to inflation. We do that with the energy bill relief that those opposite voted against. We do that with the energy price caps that those opposite voted against. You have absolutely no credibility on Middle Australia or anything else to do with the budget.
Concluded. Call to the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. In its first 12 months, how has the Albanese government delivered on its promise to deliver better health care for Australians after a decade of neglect?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Hunter for his question. He was so clear in his promise to his community at the last election on his commitment to deliver better health care for his community in the Hunter Valley. He promised to reinstate funding that was cut by the Liberal Party to the Hunter After Hours GP service, a nation-leading after-hours service, and he delivered on that promise along with his colleagues, the member for Patterson, the member for Newcastle and the member for Shortland. He promised to reinstate the right of general practices in his community to recruit overseas trained doctors, and he delivered on that promise as well. And after 9 long years of cuts and neglect to Medicare that have made it harder than ever to see a doctor and more expensive, he promised to strengthen Medicare. And, Mr Speaker, this month's budget we delivered on that promise as well, with a $6 billion package of new initiatives to strengthen Medicare, along with the largest increase across the board to Medicare rebates in more than 30 years, a $1.5 billion boost to indexation that next year, in 1 year, will deliver a bigger increase to Medicare rebates than the former government delivered in their first 7 years, of government. But, Mr Speaker, the centrepiece of this month's budget and our strengthening Medicare package is $3.5 billion to triple the bulk billing incentive, because for the Labor Party, bulk billing is the beating heart of the Medicare system, the beating heart of the system. And this will make a huge change to general practice. For in the cities, a standard bulk billed consult in the cities will see an increase to GPs of more than a third. The total fee paid to GPs will rise by more than a third, and that increase will be even higher in regions like the Hunter Valley. A standard bulk billed consult in Cessnock, for example, in the Hunter Valley, in the member for Hunter's electorate, will rise by 50%, from $50 to $75. This covers, as the Prime Minister said, more than 11 million Australians, accounting for more than 60% of all activity in general practice, including 88,000, can I say, in the member for Hunter's electorate. That's why the College for General Practitioners described this budget as a game changer, particularly the bulk billing. It will be a game changer, Mr Speaker, for millions of mums and dads who want the confidence that when their kid gets sick, they can go to a bulk billed doctor. A game changer for millions of pensioners, self-funded retirees, concession card holders who need the confidence of bulk billing. And, Mr Speaker, importantly, a game changer for tens of thousands of general practitioners who, after 9 years, finally see a government in Canberra that values their important work.
Give the call to the member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm Australia has a core inflation rate higher than the US, the UK and the Euro area?
Order. Far too much noise on my right. Give the call. Order. The member for Fenner and the Minister for Home Affairs. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm asked about Australia's economic performance in comparison to other countries. Is that not the question? That not the question.
Order.
Is that not the question?
Prime Minister will continue.
And it's quite good because I was with Prime Minister Sunak just yesterday, and Prime Minister Sunak of the Conservative Party was saying to me how well Australia's going with our better inflation figures, with our better performance when it comes to jobs growth, with our better performance when it comes to, of course, our budget surplus as well. And indeed, if you look at the G7 countries and how we're going, Mr Speaker, our GDP growth of 2.7%.
Order. I want to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, a very tight question. Can the Prime Minister confirm Australia has a core inflation rate higher than the US, the UK and the Euro area? Core inflation, not GDP, not waffle, very specific. If he doesn't know the answer, he should sit down.
Order. The Prime Minister is 1 minute in. He is talking about international economic indicators, and I'll listen to him carefully. He's got 2 minutes to answer the question, and he is being relevant at this stage. If he strays, I'll make sure he continues to follow the right course of action. I'll give him the call.
No, they're not aware that issues like GDP and employment and all those issues are relevant for inflation. And what I know is this also, is that the highest inflation rate this century for any quarter is on their watch. The March 2022 quarter, and what their response was to pour money into the economy as a result of a budget that did not have a single dollar of savings, not $1. When you look at our comparison with the G7, our GDP growth is the highest, higher than any G7 country: Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK or the US.
Order.
Our participation rate on employment at 66.7% is higher than, guess what, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK, US. Our employment growth of 2.9% is, guess what, higher than Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK and US. And indeed, in the first 12 months that this government have held office, we have created, on our watch, more jobs than any government on record. That's our economic record, making a difference, and indeed the measures such as the measure that we introduced on energy price relief is estimated by the Treasury to put 0.75% downward pressure on inflation, something that they voted against.
Give the call to the order. Give the call to the honourable member for Cunningham.
To the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government laying the foundations for a better future for Australian children and families by making early childhood education more affordable?
Give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Cunningham for her question and would like to congratulate her on 1 year in this place. I know that the member for Cunningham, like all on this side of the House, is passionate about building a better future for Australian children. Now, a year ago, Mr Speaker, Australians voted, and they voted for a government that puts Australian families first, a government that believes in giving every child the very best start in life, a government that believes in ensuring primary carers have a choice, a government that values our early childhood education workforce, and a government that recognises the cost of early childhood education often puts it out of reach for far too many families. But the Albanese Labor government is taking action, laying the foundations for a better future. And from July, only a few more sleeps away, early childhood education and care will be more affordable for over 1.2 million families across Australia. Now, that includes 265,000 families in rural and regional Australia. What does that mean? In practical terms, it means that a family earning $120,000 a year with one child in early learning will save about $1,700 a year. Now, that's real money. That's real cost of living relief. And that makes a real difference to Australian families.
Order.
These are vital reforms, Mr Speaker, that will ensure children have access to high-quality, affordable early childhood education. But we know that the work doesn't stop after just 1 year. We've also commenced an ACCC price inquiry and a Productivity Commission review into the broader early childhood education and care sector. Now, these key pieces of work will help us better understand how the system can become a more sustainable, more affordable early learning system that benefits every single child in Australia. We know that a strong and sustainable and qualified workforce is vital to this system, and that's why we passed the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill last year, making our industrial relations system fairer for low-paid, female-dominated sectors. This government has been working from day one, Mr Speaker, to build an early childhood sector that is high quality, that is accessible and that is affordable for all Australians, building on the past legacies of a Labor government in introducing the National Quality Framework for all early childhood education educators in this country. Mr Speaker, after just 1 year, we have already delivered relief for families for early childhood education, and we will continue to deliver a world-class system for our very youngest Australians.
Call to the honourable member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm Australia has a core inflation rate higher than the US, the UK and the euro area?
The question was almost word for word with the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister has answered this question, so I'll... order. I'm going to allow... Yeah, well, that's what I'm just about to say before... I'm going to allow the Prime Minister to answer the question, but technically understanding orders, questions that have already been asked can't be asked again. Yep.
Words, Mr Speaker. I mean, this is a very tight question. It hasn't been fully answered. The Prime Minister has not answered that question. And he should be, frankly, Mr Speaker, given some indication now that he needs to answer that question, which he's refused to do so far.
You resume your seat. You may not like the Prime Minister's answer, but he has answered the similar question. Order. I'm going to allow the question, and I give the Prime Minister the call.
Mr Speaker.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition.
He's angry, Mr Speaker. He's angry. He's had the angry pills. I would have thought you had the weekend off. He could have relaxed, chilled out a bit, come here on Monday, be a bit happier. Be a bit happier. Because that's what his groups are telling him. He's got to be happier, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister will return to the question.
Smile a bit more. Remember when he ran for the leadership and he was going to smile some more? I remember that press conference.
Order.
That was his core promise, Mr Speaker. But
order. Members on my left, the member for Fairfax.
Have some thought for the poor old shadow treasurer. You get all these economic questions and he can't get one. And he can't get one. He's got backbenchers doing it.
The Prime Minister, the member for Deakin is warned. Order. Members on my right. There's far too much noise. I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition. A point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, there are millions of Australians who are hurting at the moment because of the decisions of this government. Instead of the hubris, could we answer the question, please? Core inflation is higher than those other countries.
Order. Just going to ask the House to order. If this continues, there will be a general warning issue to people who will leave the chamber. The member for McEwen is warned. When the House comes to order, I want to hear from the Prime Minister regarding this question. Here's the call.
Thank you. When he's finished, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister will continue with his answer, and the Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting
He's very
immediately.
angry, Mr Speaker. He's very angry and frustrated. And I suspect he's angry because he knows.
The member for Petrie is seeking the call. The Prime Minister will pause. Order. Order. The member for Petrie is entitled to be heard on a point of order.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Speaker. It is Standing Order 90, reflections on members. We've had over 1 minute from the Prime Minister, and all of that time he has been reflecting on the Leader of the Opposition and everyone else on this side. Standing Order 90.
Resume your seat. The House is under a general warning now. The next person who interjects will be leaving the chamber. I want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, practice is quite specific about the sorts of things that constitute reflections on members. Pointing out that the Leader of the Opposition is angry is not covered by that standing order.
I'm just going to ask the Prime Minister to return to the question. We're going to get through this in silence.
Speaker, I'm getting to the question.
Order.
Which is that I too would be angry if I had presided over a 2.1% increase. The largest quarterly increase was in the March 2022. That was the highest inflation this century was on their watch, and their response after that quarter. In March,
the Manager of Opposition Business. The Prime Minister will continue. Order.
Was to massively increase spending in the vain hope that they would be re-elected in the May 2022 budget. That is just a fact, and it is a fact that on that budget day, they of course had a whole lot of new spending but no savings, and it's also a fact that we produced two budgets that have produced $40 billion of savings. It's also a fact that we overwhelmingly returned the increase in revenue to the bottom line to take pressure off inflation. And that is why Philip Lowe, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, has said on the 2nd of May inflation in Australia has passed its peak. That's why all the ratings agencies have said, including Fitch Ratings, is not likely to contribute to inflationary pressures in the economy. That's why Westpac's Bill Evans said, I don't expect them to put upward pressure on interest rates.
Concluded. Give the call to the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How has the Albanese Labor government used its first 12 months to end a decade of denial and neglect, to deliver stronger, more reliable energy and restore Australia's climate leadership?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her question. And indeed, the Albanese government has spent the last 12 months restoring stability and certainty to energy policy in this country. We've done so because over the last decade we know that 4 gigawatts of dispatchable energy left our energy grid and only 1 gigawatt came on. and that left Australian households and businesses and our entire energy system exposed to international pressures in a very suboptimal way. And we knew that we had to provide that certainty for investment. I am pleased to report to the honourable member and the House that investment in renewable, large-scale investment in renewable investment is up 55% over the last 12 months, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to report to the honourable member and the House that we have seen a record investment in 7.1 gigawatts of renewable energy across this country in the last 12 months. A record, Mr Speaker, thanks to the policies of this government.
Leader of the Nationals.
That is a record which those opposite would not be able to boast of. They wouldn't want to boast about it because they didn't support renewable energy. Now, we know, Mr Speaker, what has been necessary. It's been necessary to provide stability by enshrining our climate targets into the law of the land. And renewable energy investors from around the world have told us that that has been vital in encouraging investment into our country. We also know that it's been necessary to provide the stability and certainty to investors, to tell them that the transmission will exist to support that investment. And we have been rolling out our Rewiring the Nation policies across the country, opposed by those opposite. And we know that we need to provide further stability, and we've done that in the budget with the Capacity Investment Scheme, which is reflected in the budget, agreed unanimously with the states and territories, and I have announced that the first auctions will occur in South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. This is very important as well, Mr Speaker, to provide that stability, and it will unleash up to $10 billion worth of investment and 6 gigawatts worth of investment. That's what these policies will do. And we know also, Mr Speaker, that this is a massive job creation opportunity for our country, and that's why the arrangements announced by the Prime Minister and the President of the United States yesterday are so important, to ensure that our capacity as a renewable energy export powerhouse is harnessed in cooperation with our like-minded partners, none so more important than the United States of America. This is what we spent the last 12 months doing, Mr Speaker, and we know we have so much more to do. We're very pleased with progress in the first 12 months, but we're far from satisfied because we've got a decade of denial and delay to catch up on. We've got a decade of neglect. 22 energy policies they gave us over 10 years and not one worked. We've been putting into place one energy policy, one climate policy, and it has been working.
Order. The member for Page. Give the call to the member for Calais.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, in the central west of New South Wales, communities like Eugowra, Molong, Kewdale and Canowindra were devastated by the storms and floods of last year. The stories of heartbreak and tragedy have been made worse by the shocking and cold-hearted treatment of many local residents by some insurance companies. The anger in our communities is white-hot, and I don't think we're alone. Will your government support a parliamentary inquiry into the response of insurance companies to recent natural disasters in Australia?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Calais for his question, and I indeed have visited the member's electorate with him, witnessing firsthand the devastating impact of the flooding that occurred, also witnessing at the same time the extraordinary resilience of communities that he represents. In common, it must be said, with the member for Riverina or the member for Page, whenever you visit an area that has been devastated, you're struck by a couple of things. One is the extraordinary work of our professional support, including public servants, but also the volunteers through organisations like the SES and the work that they do. I know as well that the issue of insurance has been a very big one for a long period of time, and getting communities back on their feet is vitally important, and insurance plays a big part on that. The government is spending $25.3 million over 5 years to help reduce the cost of insurance in disaster-prone communities, and this includes the establishment of the Hazard Insurance Partnership with the insurance sector to address insurance issues driven by natural hazards. The package will identify where the most pressing insurance issues are and how to best address them and support better targeted mitigation and resilience strategies. And of course, we have a fund that we will spend every year on trying to get ahead of the impact of natural disasters, a fund that will ensure that issues including levies and other measures are implemented. We recently as well announced some $262 million over 10 years to upgrade flood gauges in high-priority catchment areas across Australia. There had already been some work done there in the member for Page's electorate and in the north coast of New South Wales in partnership with the New South Wales government. There will be more work done in Queensland in areas that are affected. Can I say this on behalf of the government, but I think on behalf of every member here? We expect insurance companies to meet their obligations under the Insurance Code of Practice, including the requirements to manage disputes in the payment of claims and act in an open, fair, honest and transparent way with their customers. I'll speak with the relevant Minister, the Assistant Treasurer as well, about your proposal for a parliamentary inquiry. I respect the way that you've put it forward as an appropriate way of raising that issue, and I say that with you, the government stands ready, as with every member in this chamber, to provide support for communities at their time of need.
Call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. In its first 12 months in office, how has the Albanese Labor government reversed previous policies to get wages moving and to get more Australians into jobs?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Dunkley for the question, because the policy change has been deliberate. And what was keeping people out of secure jobs and what was keeping people with flatlining wages for nearly a decade was also deliberate. It was a deliberate design feature of the previous decade in office. But we have had now, in the first 12 months, a deliberate getting jobs moving as a deliberate design feature of this government, getting wages moving as a deliberate design feature of this government, and closing the gender pay gap as a deliberate design feature of this government. For the first 12 months, as the Treasurer has already said, 330,000 Australians, more Australians employed, 330,000, the best first 12 months of any Australian government. But of that 330,000, it's not like it's clouded with all those jobs being insecure. More than 280,000 of those jobs are full-time. More than 280,000. Stronger employment growth than any of the major advanced economies. But it's not just jobs that have been growing as a deliberate design feature, it's wages moving as well. Average full-time annual earnings $1,000 a year higher going into people's bank accounts than if the growth levels of flatlining wages had remained as they were under the previous government. The fastest annual growth in guess how long? A decade. And that's what happens when you stop having low wages as a deliberate design feature and getting wages moving becomes a deliberate design feature of this government. But some of the best outcomes that we're seeing in both wages and in employment are the statistics that have come out recently for women workers in Australia. We now have the highest number of women in recorded history in full-time work. The female unemployment rate at 3.3% is the lowest it has been in 50 years. And why would it be that we're getting better female employment statistics coming through? Could it be connected to the fact that we now have a government that's implementing all 55 recommendations of the Respect at Work report? Could it be that gender equality is now an objective of the Fair Work Act? Could it be because we now have a government that turns up to the Fair Work Commission and argues for pay rises for people on low wages, including for feminised industries like in aged care? The changes that have been happening have been deliberate. When people had insecure work, when people were on sluggish wage growth, it was a deliberate decision from those opposite, and getting wages moving, closing the gender pay gap and
Order.
getting people into secure jobs is a deliberate decision of the Albanese government.
Give the call to the honourable member for Dawson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Tourism accounts for billions of dollars of vital economic activity across Queensland, including in my electorate of Dawson. But Labor are slugging Queenslanders with a new tourism tax by increasing the Passions and Movement charge from $60 to $70. Why do Australians always pay more when Labor breaks its promises?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and to the honourable member for his question. The honourable member is right to say that the passenger movement charge is going from $60 to $70. It hasn't been indexed since, I think, 2017, and so it reflects the indexation of that charge. Now, what the honourable member didn't say in his question, but what the House might be interested in, is that this payment is for people leaving Australia. Now, I have more faith in the tourism industry of Queensland than the honourable member does if he thinks an extra $10 to leave Queensland is going to deter people from coming to Queensland in the first place. They're not sitting around in London, Mr Speaker. They're not sitting around in London or in Brussels thinking, I really want to hit the Sunshine Coast, but that $10 on the way out is going to prevent me. They're not sitting around in the capitals of Europe or North America or throughout our region saying, I really want to go to Cairns and drop a few $1,000s in one of the most beautiful places on earth, but I won't do that because of the extra $10 that reflects the indexation from 2017. These are the depths to which those opposite will plummet, to try and pretend that the budget that we handed down a couple of weeks ago was something other than a demonstration of the responsible economic management which has been a hallmark of our first 12 months in office and which was so conspicuously absent from the wasted decade that those opposite, a wasted decade defined by rorts and waste and economic mismanagement and deficits as far as the eye can see and $1 trillion of debt with almost nothing to show for it. Mr Speaker, we make the right decisions for the right reasons. You saw that in the budget, and I believe in the tourism industry of Queensland. I say that as a proud Queenslander and as a proud Australian. People will continue to come to Queensland because it's amazing, and people will continue to come to Australia because it's amazing, and $10 to leave Australia again won't deter them.
The Treasurer has concluded his answer. I give the call to the member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Financial Services. Australians lost $3 billion to scams in 2022. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to end a decade of neglect and fight back against scammers to protect Australians from the threats of scams?
Call to the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Financial Services.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member for Adelaide for the question, and I thank him for organising a tremendous community forum in his electorate on Friday last week. We had lots of people there sharing their stories and very keen to know what the government was doing to help them in the battle against scammers. And indeed, over the last few weeks, we've held a number of town hall meetings around the country in the electorates of Tangi, in Swan, in Hasluck, in Macquarie, in Boothby, in Isaacs, in Moreton and in Dunkley. And, Speaker, at each of these forums, people have been saying the same story. They're being bombarded by emails, by SMSs. They're having their money stolen or threatened to be stolen by criminal gangs who are preying on them and their innocence, and it's impacting their ability to engage in online commerce. They're feeling that they want the government to do something about it, and they know that the problem has got worse and worse and worse. And the simple fact of the matter is that the previous government on this issue was indolent, completely indolent. They left Australian households on their own to fight the scammers. Well, there's been a new government and a new change and a fresh approach, and we are on the side of consumers. And we're going to fight back. We're going to fight back against the scammers. We're establishing a national anti-scam centre, a world first as a result of the announcement made in the budget last week, over $56 million. It'll have three functions. Firstly, real-time reporting and sharing of information. So if anywhere in the country a scam is reported, it's shared with the people who need to act fast, to pull up the barriers, put the red flags in to stop the scammers going to work. We're also going to put in place new fusion cells which are action squads which are going after the scammers who are preying on Australians. Something the previous mob could have done, but didn't. They could have done, but they didn't. Mr Speaker, they're making a lot of noise. They should be as angry as they are about the billions of dollars that ripped out of Australians' bank accounts and flooded overseas on their watch. If only they were as angry about that as they are today. This initiative will work hand in hand with the work that my colleague, the Minister for Communications, is doing to put in place new registers for SMSs to ensure that those SMS messages are being filtered and blocked at source. It works hand in hand with the work that the Minister for Cyber Security is doing to ensure that we are uplifting our capacity as well. We'll be putting in place new industry codes to ensure that we set out the responsibilities of the private sector and the rights of individual citizens. Australians won't be left alone under this government, unlike the previous one.
Has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, you would be aware that Stella Assange is in Parliament House and in fact is in the gallery right now. Prime Minister, why are you not meeting with Stella today? Will you meet with Stella tomorrow? And why won't you do more to see Julian Assange reunited with Stella and their young sons, Gabriel and Max?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, and indeed who I meet with is determined by the priorities that my office has. A priority for us isn't doing something that is a demonstration, it's actually doing something that produces an outcome. And that's my focus, not grandstanding. And so if I thought that that would help, then yes, there would be a case that the member for Clark has. But I've made it very clear to the US administration and also to the UK administration of the Australian government's view, and I appreciate the fact that that is now a bipartisan view after the comments last week of the Leader of the Opposition, that enough is enough when it comes to the ongoing incarceration of Julian Assange, that nothing is served from the ongoing incarceration of Julian Assange. And what I have done is to act in the most effective way possible. If having a demonstration produced an outcome, then there would be an argument. But what I have done is act diplomatically in order to maximise the opportunity that is there of breaking through an issue which has gone on for far too long. So I appreciate the member's sincerity on this issue, along with a range of other members from across the parliament who have raised this issue. As an Australian citizen, I have made representations. I will continue to do so. This issue is not a simple one, and I do not make my motivation here is not to make a judgment. People will have different judgments about the actions of Mr Assange and can still reach that conclusion of enough is enough. But it is certainly my view that this issue does need to be resolved, and I'll continue to advocate, as I continue to advocate for Australian citizens around the world. That is the role that the Australian government has. That's the role we'll continue to have. And I'm very pleased that this is now a bipartisan issue, and I acknowledge that.
The call to the honourable member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. How has the Albanese Labor government delivered for Australian women in its first 12 months?
The call to the Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Can I thank very much the member for Jagga Jagga for her question, and I know that the status of Australian women is a topic close to the member's heart, and I thank her for her ongoing advocacy for women in her own community but also across Australia. Of course, 12 months ago, Australians voted for a better future, and over our first 12 months in office, our government has worked hard to deliver on our commitments to begin laying stronger foundations to support women across this country. In 12 months, we've embedded women's economic equality as a core economic imperative through prioritising gender equality as part of the September 2020 Jobs and Skills Summit, and as you heard from the Minister for Workplace Relations, the important role that has played in getting employment for women, but also getting wages growth for women. We've backed this up with investments of billions of dollars across our first two budgets, and that includes targeted cost of living relief that supports women who are experiencing the most disadvantage, including by increasing the eligibility for single-parent payments so parents can access it until their child is 14, investing in early childhood education and funding the biggest boost to paid parental leave since its establishment in 2011, and supporting a pay increase for aged care and low-paid workers who are overwhelmingly women, then funding this increase in the budget. We've led negotiations with the states and territories to finalise the national plan to end violence against women and children and back that up with record investment of $2.2 billion in the budget. We've of course legislated paid family and domestic violence leave and funded and legislated all 55 recommendations of the Respect at Work report. We've passed legislation to publish the gender pay gaps of employers with 100 or more workers, a key reform to drive transparency and action towards closing the gender pay gap. And importantly, we've introduced amendments to the Family Law Act to ensure that it is less traumatic for women and children impacted by domestic, family and sexual violence. We've done a lot in the first 12 months, but of course there is much more to do. These policies, this legislation does not happen by accident. Having women at the table, having women at the cabinet table, having women here in parliament actually matters when it comes to gender equality. I note that just 27% of the previous government were women, more than half of the members of the Albanese government are women, and just under half of the cabinet room. It actually matters when it comes to making policy. It's been a big 12 months when it comes to making sure we embed women's and gender equality into the policies of the Albanese government and taking action, but we know we've got more to do and we're up for the job.
Yeah. Give a call to the honourable member for Deakin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. New dwelling construction is at its lowest level in over 10 years. Builders are collapsing and housing investment is dropping on the government's watch. Yet the government's own budget papers say 1.5 million people will come to Australia over the next 5 years. When will the minister finally admit that Labor has no plan to house its big Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Of course, those opposite, if they had been in government, would have higher immigration than what we currently have. And that is actually the position that they had previously. But I would say to the member opposite, as he would know, he's actually stopping more housing on the ground today with the Housing Australia Future Fund in the Senate. Absolutely stopping us having a debate and a vote on the Housing Australia Future Fund in the Senate just last sitting week. Indeed, Mr Speaker, we've been getting on with delivering housing right across the country since we came to government. We have not wasted a day in trying to make sure that we get more homes on the ground, despite those opposite and the Green senators standing in the way of our Housing Australia Future Fund, which would deliver 30,000 social and affordable rental homes in Australia in the first 5 years of the fund. 4,000 of those homes would be for women and children fleeing family violence. Seriously, those opposite come in here and talk about housing, and they are standing in the way of a core part of our agenda, Mr Speaker. But of course it's not the only part of our agenda.
The Minister will pause
a moment. Come to office.
The Minister will pause. There is far too much noise from the member for Wannon, Deakin and Hume while this minister is speaking. They will remain silent for the remainder of her answer, or three of them will leave the chamber. Give the call to the minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Since we came to office, we immediately unlocked up to $575 million from the National Housing Infrastructure Facility, and indeed we already have homes being built across the country today because we unlocked that funding. In our first budget in October, we announced the National Housing Accord, a commitment to build a further 20,000 affordable rentals with the states for key workers right across the country. Our expanded home guarantee. We've helped more than 50,000 Australians into home ownership since we came to office. 50,000 in our first year. That includes 6,000 in regional Australia through the Regional First Home Buyer Guarantee that we brought forward by 3 months, Mr Speaker. And of course, in the budget, we announced the Commonwealth Rental Assistance, 15% increase, the largest increase in more than 30 years. Our build-to-rent changes, our depreciation changes that will add more than 150,000 new dwellings.
The Minister was asked about the budget papers, and she's referring to what the government has announced in the budget, but I'll hear from the member for Deakin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The minister is studiously avoiding 1.5 million people and where they will live. That is relevant to this question and is relevant to the heart of the question, Mr Speaker.
The member is on a warning. I specifically said that the minister was being relevant to the question regarding. She doesn't have to answer every single part of the question. She's got to remain her understanding orders. Got to make sure she's relevant to the question. She's being directly relevant. If you do that again, you'll be asked to leave. The minister is relevant, and I asked her to return to her answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Of course, in the budget we also announced a $67.5 million boost to homelessness after the terrible census figures about the increased number of Australians that were homeless. That was part of the additional $1.6 billion for our one-year extension of the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement with the states and territories. And of course, as I have said, the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund, which is a critical part of our agenda, they continue to block in the Senate. They don't support it. The Green senators don't support it. People come in this place and they want to talk about housing for Australians. They should be honest with their constituents that they are stopping in the way of critical housing that Australians that need it most are relying on today. The sooner we get that fund through, the sooner we get the returns, the sooner we get more homes on the ground more quickly.
Give the call to the member for Parramatta.
My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering for Australian manufacturers, and has there been any opposition to these initiatives?
Call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Parramatta for the question. Also, thank you for taking me to see Helios Power in Rydalmere, a great electronics manufacturer doing some good work in defence and transport. And it was also good last week to see a number of Australian manufacturers doing really well, be it Numi Foods in the member for Macarthur's electorate, in Geelong, Recharge Industries, with the ambition to manufacture Australian-made batteries, which the Deputy Prime Minister, the member for Corangamite, is very happy to see.
Order.
And also in Moreton, Orcon Steel, helping us manufacture products that will be important for the transition to a clean energy future. The common thread being Australian manufacturers with the confidence to do more onshore and create great jobs for fellow Australians. Now, 12 months ago, the Albanese government elected on a commitment to build a future made in Australia. In that time, we've secured support for the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund. In the last budget, just a few weeks ago, the Industry Growth Program to help build small, medium businesses, provide them with the support to grow. We also had support for the Powering Australia Industry Growth Centre, plus the development of a national battery strategy to manufacture more renewable technology here in Australia, all delivering for manufacturers today and tomorrow. Now, of course, it would be a different story for manufacturing in Australia if the election had turned out differently. Coalition basically spent a decade daring manufacturers to leave, reducing support for manufacturing, manufacturing self-sufficiency tanks, and gotten worse in opposition, pretending to care, never delivering. I mean, you cannot pretend to support manufacturing and then vote against the greatest investment in manufacturing capability in living memory in the National Reconstruction Fund. You can't pretend to be concerned about the impact of high energy prices on manufacturers and then vote against the energy price relief that delivers them support. All addicted to pretending. They haven't learned a thing. They all got this from the member for Cook. Remember the member for Cook? Pretended to be a welder, pretended to be a carpenter, pretended to be a truck driver, pretended to be half the cabinet. I mean, you cannot just continually, they cannot, Speaker, pretend to care and not be there. They can't be all talk, no walk. Australian manufacturers deserve better. Now, we know we've done a lot of work in the last 12 months. We've got more to do. We will not slow down in our commitment to deliver a future made in Australia, and it's time those opposite actually did the same.
Give the call to the honourable member for Hughes.
My question is to the Minister for Housing.
Order.
KPMG urban economist Terry Rawnsley says there are 16,400 dwellings in Sydney approved but not yet commenced, the highest number in 4 years. Yet the government's own budget papers says an extra 1.5 million people will come to Australia over 5 years. When will the minister finally admit that Labor has no plan to house its big Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Small Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to outline our plans for housing again for the House, Mr. Speaker, because of course we do have a comprehensive plan for housing. And one of the critical parts that I left out of the last answer actually was about the fact that we have on the National Cabinet agenda renters' rights and how we are meeting regularly with the states and territories. Under the former government, the housing ministers did not meet in almost 5 years. We've already had 4 meetings, Mr. Speaker, where we are talking about how to get homes on the ground more quickly. And of course, a critical part of our National Housing Accord is actually about supply. It's about 1 million homes from 1 July 2024, our aspirational target that the states and local government have signed up to. And they are talking about what type of planning reforms the states and territories and local governments need to make to meet the 1 million homes, Mr. Speaker, and as part of our comprehensive plan of the funding that we have already unlocked, the $575 million with homes on the ground already, the National Housing Accord that I've just talked about, where we are talking about planning reforms with the states and territories, of course our Housing Australia Future Fund, which those opposite are voting against in the Senate, Mr. Speaker, 30,000 additional social and affordable rental homes that those opposite are voting against. The 20,000 additional rental homes, affordable homes that they don't support, it would appear, Mr. Speaker, from us and the territories and the states under the National Housing Accord. We are getting on with the job of delivering more housing for Australians, but those opposite need to tell their senators in the Senate to get out of our way to support the Housing Australia Future Fund. We're talking about returns of $500 million each and every year to be delivered in more housing right across the country. Those opposite need to understand that fund is critical to institutional investment and getting more leverage and more investment in housing right across the country.
Give the call to the honourable member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese government's enhanced paid parental leave scheme just one way the government is making up for almost a decade of lost time in advancing women's economic equality and delivering for working families?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Wills for that question, because, of course, improving paid parental leave is a critical Labor reform. It's critical for families, it's critical for women, and, of course, it's critical for the economy. Now, we know when it's done right, paid parental leave can advance gender equality and grow the economy. Modelling from Impact Economics and Policy showed that the establishment of paid parental leave scheme in 2011 resulted in nearly 75,000 more mothers joining the workforce and, of course, $8.5 billion to our GDP. So this is, of course, a proud Labor legacy. A proud Labor legacy when we were last in government, and now this government is continuing to build on this legacy. Of course, in our first budget, the Albanese government committed funding to improve paid parental leave. In our first year, we have legislated the first stage of our important reforms, meaning that from the 1st of July this year, not only will more parents have access to the government payment, they will also have more flexibility in how they transition back to work and how they share care between them. Since late March, pre-claiming has been open to families expecting a new child from the 1st of July. So far, over 2,000 families have lodged a pre-claim so they can start to receive this entitlement as soon as their baby arrives. Of course, 180,000 Australian families will benefit each year from our more generous paid parental leave scheme. But of course, when it comes to paid parental leave, we're just getting started. Over the coming months, the Albanese government will introduce further legislation that will implement the government's 6 months of paid parental leave scheme. Of course, our significant boost actually makes up for 9 years of wasted time by those opposite. Those opposite had 9 years to improve paid parental leave, and they wasted the opportunity. Quite to the contrary, though. Quite to the contrary, they plan to cut paid parental leave, leaving so many mums and dads without the support they need. There is only one side of this House that is delivering for Australian families, whether it's more affordable childcare, better Medicare, cheaper medicines or indeed better paid parental leave. Actions speak louder than words. Those opposite tried to cut paid parental leave. We're getting on with the job of making it better for Australian families, expanding paid parental leave and making Australian families' lives better.
To call to the Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.